So now let's look at phase one, getting your angle and keeping the angle once you get it. So first off, how do we get our angle? There's quite a few things we can do here. I talked about being up and not flat on my back, because it's going to be much easier to get the angle when I'm up. So I'm pushing with my knee, as we talked about before. I sit up. So I'm on my elbow now. Okay, we can move using our elbow. This is something, if you watch Levi Jones-Leary, excellent berimbolo player, and he does this really well. He's up on his elbow like this, so I'm seated forward, and I can walk to get my angle using my elbow like this. Okay, so I open my elbow out, and as I fall, I drag my hips. I kind of fall into it. I open, and I fall and drag my hips into it. Open, fall and drag my hips into it. As I keep doing this, I'm slowly moving towards the back and not really giving up any space. So I'm staying quite compact and tight, so it's hard for Ed to get good position on me as I'm getting around the corner. The act of falling sideways when you've sat up can get you your angle. So you look here, I'm front on to Ed. If I pull myself up, so I grip the back of the knee, sit up, and then I fall towards my shoulder here, I get my angle. Okay. So I fall and I reach my arm deep. You see that gets me around the corner where I can start to get a de la Riva hook with my knee more vertical. So again, from front on, I can sit up, fall, and get to the side. Notice my knee staying tight to my chest as I do this, giving me excellent ability then to start our second phase. Another option, apart from pulling the knee to come up, is actually to get up on my hand. And I use this, I'll talk about when I use this in a moment, but I can be up on my hand and my elbow, like we talked about before. And my hand, pushing on the ground, can walk me around. Okay? I can use that to get around the corner. So sometimes we use our foot to do the same thing. Sometimes our foot will get us around the corner, as we'll talk about in a moment, but I can use my hand to assist in getting this angle. Right? So when do I do this as opposed to pulling forward? So Ed's standing quite tall right now. Sometimes people almost like, they want to go like tall and almost crowd you here like this. And I feel when he's like this, I feel like I'm very too compacted to sit up properly here and actually like attach to the leg. I feel like he's probably going to push my knee down here because he's like so crowded on me. I can't get good positioning there. But while he's tall like that, if I kind of post, scoot my hips back to make a bit of space and start to move around, this tends to be good. Okay. Whereas if Ed tends to like kind of step back a bit and he's a bit more based and like, yeah, here's usually when I'm going to be coming towards the knee and looking for the knee as the way of getting myself up. Okay. So again, if he's crowding like this, I tend to be up, pushing myself around with my hand. Remember, we don't have a collar like we did in the gi. So we're going to be using our hand for something. We can be either pushing off the ground or reaching to this leg. Sometimes instead of me moving around as the angle, I can force Ed to face that way. For something like kicking the knee might do that. So if I kick just above his knee and force him to step back, you can see he started to face away. So to be honest, I don't use this a lot just from static. I find if I try to kick the knee, it allows Ed to kind of control and maybe get head quarters. I don't want to like take my knee too far from my chest here if I don't have to. This is something I more use if I go for waiter and it doesn't work. So if I'm trying to get the angle, Ed's squaring up, I might like hook out and then kick to help me start to get around the corner. That's more when I use it as opposed to just a static kick and then try to get around the corner. I find this leaves me a bit more vulnerable. Okay, so again, it might be more, I'm trying to get my angle, Ed's following, I can push him out, kick, step, and help myself get around the corner, also kicking him away from me. Another way we can get around for our angle is to hip escape. I can put my foot to the mat and scoot around the corner using that. Now be careful with this. Okay, so like the way I just showed it would actually be a terrible idea. If you're too close to the leg and I put this foot down, whenever I put my foot down, I open space between my knee and my chest. Ed could actually just crowd that space and start to work towards some sort of pass here. Okay, so I don't want to do it when this foot's really in reach. I want to do it when I can take that foot away a little bit. So maybe I've had my foot up here like so. I'm starting to get a little bit of an angle, and now I step out here. Notice here, Ed would have to take a huge step around the corner, and by the time he does that, my hip escape will kind of beat me around the corner. So I can kind of, as he's trying to square up, I'm using my own leg to counter that. But if I start too front on, step to the ground, this is definitely a bad idea. Even just to headquarters, if you want to step into headquarters, I'm going to get stuck here. So we tend to do it once I've got a little bit of an angle, and usually when I'm up, not when I'm flat, by the way. So when I'm up, now I can start using this leg to move me around and get a better angle. We can threaten the waiter sweep to make our opponent give us the angle. So often I'm looking for the angle, it's following, and if I start to threaten the waiter, he'll often tend to step back to not let me grip this leg, and that gives me a chance to attack the angle again. Similarly, so that's by like hooking the foot. Otherwise, similar sort of thing, if we've got our foot back against the hip here, often Ed will want to step back to clear that, forcing him to give me the angle as he tries to deal with that leg. Okay, so often just by having our foot here, it means he has to step back, give me the angle, just like it is with the threat of the waiter sweep. He has to kind of step back. Okay, so by using our free leg here to threaten either blocking, so he wants to step over, or hooking to go towards the waiter, he steps back, gives me an angle to start to get around the side and try and get the hips to the mat. You can sometimes lift your hips and shoot through. So this is something that's much more common in the gi. I'm going to show you what I'd say is the version I don't use, but probably emphasizes this more, and then I'll show you how I actually do it in reality. We can step on the hip and back heel to lift our hips up. Okay. When my hips are up, that can often allow me to turn and shoot through, almost getting like a deep de la Riva hook, and then falling in to an angle. Okay, so notice if I curl back, lift my hips up, pressuring my knee forward, I can then turn on the spot and feed my left foot to where my right foot is, in front of the leg. Now, because of this, if I essentially just extend my leg, it will force Ed's knee forward and force him to turn his back. Okay, so when we look at that, a step, lift, hook, and that gets me around the corner. You can do it like that. I don't love stepping on top of the hip here. I find I'm a little more vulnerable to things like leg drags, so I prefer to keep my foot just on the outside where he can't drag my leg across. Okay, so here, drag my leg across, that's an issue. Here, drag my leg across. He can't unless he kind of steps back, which gives us what we wanted. Okay, so we can do a more subtle version, and I tend to keep a shallow hook more than go for a deep hook. Okay, so I kind of push in, have my foot here, so both feet kind of push forward, lifting the hips, turning, and a little push off the ground with my hand lets me get a good hook and good position on the angle. Okay, so again, put front on, here, push, hook. I've got my angle ready to go. The last thing for getting the angle is an off balance. So if I can shift Ed's weight out this way and he can't post with this leg, he's going to have to back step with his free leg. Okay, so we're going to be using this anyway as our next phase, trying to get the hips to the mat, but it can be useful for getting the angle too. If I can start to pull Ed this way, he has to step back. That's given me an angle on the leg to start to attack. So in summary, for getting the angle on our opponent, we want to have our foot on the outside of the hip, ideally, and knee pressuring in to Ed's knee, pushing back and slightly in. Usually from here, if he's kind of leaning back a bit, I'm going to sit up, get on my elbow, and start to work to fall to the side and get my hook to establish the angle there. If he's more like hovering over the top, I'll often get up on my hand here, keeping my foot next to the hip, scoot, maybe even put my foot to the ground as I start to get a bit of an angle, helping me get around the corner and get further around the side. Now we're just talking about keeping the angle when we get it. And I'll even just talk about keeping your initial angle. Even if you don't have an angle, I still don't want Ed to turn his knee out even further this way. Okay, so when we get our initial grip, we're usually gripping around the heel, and I actually want my forearm blocking the outside of the foot so he can't even turn his foot out, because that would allow his knee to turn. If his foot can't turn out, his knee can't really face out very much. Okay, so we actually want our forearm locked down, tight like this. Okay, turn your knee out. You can see that's blocked it. If I just grip the ankle here, turn your foot out, now his whole knee turns out. Look how much further I have to go for the angle. Okay, so when we grip, make sure it's nice and low, elbow locking tight against the end of the toes here. As we get a deep grip, we're going to want a similar sort of pressure. So I want to get like a deep overhook here. I'm going to be pulling the heel back. So I've got my elbow, I'm just showing with my right hand, but my elbow is doing this. It's hooking the heel. It's actually pulling back, turning the knee in. So I have pressure here, plus I've got pressure into his knee. Them to combine, like try and face towards me with your knee, I've got like good pressure pulling against that. So when we get around the corner, even if it's on the ground, I want to be pulling back right at my elbow, hooked around the actual heel. The de la Riva hook itself should be almost actively turning Ed to face away. So as I said, knee high, as I said, the foot hooks in, my knee's close to my body, and I'm pressuring the knee in, but this needs to be curled back. So if I go too high with the hook, I'll often like lose it as I put outward pressure. So that's why I think a shallow hook can often be better. And my knee pressuring in works against, so it's like this is anchored. Imagine my foot's anchored by curling back. The top and outstep of my foot is anchored against the inside of his thigh. And my pressure here turns inwards. So if you combine that with a grip on the ankle and the angle, my de la Riva hook's turning him in, and if Ed's trying to turn out, that's difficult to do. Okay, you can probably feel quite a bit of pressure there, stopping him from turning out. So make sure these sort of things you've got right, because this is often the biggest difference between someone who feels good at de la Riva and not. It's just the actual hook feeling tight. Okay, so we want to have our hook in, our knee pressuring back towards me, extending up and inside. Okay, so again, not loose, not kicking my knee too deep here. Pulling back first, hooking, then pressuring up and in to apply good pressure here in combination with my overhook grip. And I feel like it's going to be very hard for Ed to regain the angle. The other stuff we talked about getting the angle, we can still keep doing, such as the hip escapes, or potentially walking on our hand. We obviously manage our angle there too. Bit of troubleshooting now for the initial phase. So on the first phase, the first one is if Ed keeps putting me in headquarters. Okay, so first off, if he keeps getting me in headquarters, I've probably stretched my leg out too much. Okay, I'm giving him a chance to control my leg. If I feel like he's getting good control of the leg, it's much better to retract it. Okay, knee tight, foot coming close, here like this. Right, keep it out here while he controls it. He steps back, steps over, and he can get on top of the leg. All right, so got that. We will be later talking about how to get waiter, but often as they enter to headquarters, if you've got your leg in good position, he tries to enter, we can often off balance kicking forward, which gives us good angles to either go back for the bowler or go to the waiter position. Yeah. Or as Ed grabs the leg and tries to step over, we can also be looking to hook and make him step very wide. So he obviously wanted to have my foot jammed here as he goes to step. If I can stretch him out wide, he's going to really struggle to get headquarters. Again, we can start entering waiter or X guard from there. The leg drag might be an issue that you're running into. Let's talk about why that might be the case. Okay, I really don't want my foot just dangling here where it's easy for Ed to grip and go for a leg drag. This is kind of good positioning for him to do that. Okay, so my foot tends to be like tight and away. So if he tries to leg drag here, he's got to really lean in and it's not so easy to get. And I should be able to react in time. Okay, with my leg back like that, I should be able to react and defend. Okay? Or more commonly for me, I'd rather actually just have my foot past the hip because now he can't leg drag. Okay, he has to actually like move back with his whole body backwards, and then by the time he does that, he's going to give me my angle. If I've got my de la Riva hook, he's going to struggle to leg drag. Okay, if I've got this hook, go to leg drag now. I can kind of push-pull. Right, I'm pushing with the hook, pulling with my leg. That's difficult. Right. Now, if he is leg dragging here, then usually the first thing I look to do is reach behind the knee and take my de la Riva hook to the inside. Okay, so I take my foot to the inside. All right, so go for the leg drag now in, like so. Okay, now that my knee's on the inside, I have a great K-guard entry, and I can start to work underneath the legs. Okay, so again, we're here, it's going for it. It's basically a shallow K-guard entry. Okay, so we're going here, underhooking, moving our knee to the inside, we've got our shallow K-guard. I mentioned this earlier, but if I'm having trouble when my de la Riva hook keeps getting pushed down, it's probably because I'm trying to look for a hook early on and not focusing on the knee pressure with the knee pointing upwards. Okay, so my knee needs to point upwards, pretty much covering Ed's knee. So if your leg does get pushed down, then obviously early on, try to drive your knee in. If you're late, then that's when we need to be thinking about retention. Okay, once it's down there, there's not a lot I can do great from de la Riva, so I'll often frame either the shoulder, sometimes the neck, usually the shoulder, to give me enough chance to high pummel, get my foot in front, retract my leg, and then hopefully once I've done that, I can be back on the leg, get my leg back in good position. Okay, so again, it pushes that down, frame, taking my foot over the top of the shoulder, use this to push-pull, get my right leg back in good position. So I've got like 2 frames here. I can be gripping the leg now, getting my hips in good position, pressure into Ed's knee. So now we're working from when we manage to get our angle and what our options are here. So there's going to be 3 main outcomes that we look for. I'm going to pull Ed down to the mat and he posts on his hand or drops to his hip. That's one possible outcome. We go back up. Maybe he steps back really far with his leg so he doesn't actually fall over, okay? But this leg becomes available and we can start gripping on, attaching to the leg, starting to look towards taking the back from here. Or as I get my angle, Ed really tries to recorrect it and I knock him out to the side into either getting X-guard on the far leg or the waiter position. Often the best time to go for the off balance and try and get Ed down to the mat is as soon as you get your angle. Okay, so as soon as I get around, I want to be looking to get his hips down towards the mat. It's the best time to go for it. He's not in position to defend it very well. Okay, so just be aware of this. If you get your angle, settle, and then start working, it's often a lot harder. Okay, let him get his base and start to square up again. So as soon as you go to the side, you've usually got a bit of momentum, swinging from your shoulder down to the mat to actually start to pull and start to get him down. In terms of, so I want to pull on Ed's, essentially his knee to try and off balance him, or the top of his thigh. Okay. So when I was sitting up, I'll often be gripping the back of the knee. This is not the same position I try to pull him with. It's not as good leverage here as coming up here, a bit higher. Okay, so I'm going to just reach over the top a bit higher to get good pull to try and get his hips down to the mat. We're going to have a few things working at once. I've got my de la Riva hook, which is going to kick backwards like this. So that's why we want our knee close and kicking back like over our head this way, not kicking forward and up. Okay, if you kicked your foot too deep, you'll have poor leverage. Like if you've extended too far, there's a lot of leverage against you working this way compared to a shorter lever like resisting you, so you can actually be stronger here. Okay, I want my foot to be bridging off the ground. Usually, not always, but usually this foot is helping. So as I kick, I lift. Okay, I get extra power by doing this, and I can use my hand as well. Okay, like so. So the 3 things that are working together. The last thing is that I've actually was sitting up and I'm going to be falling down. Okay, so I'm going to use that momentum too. And that's why everything working together, it's a really powerful movement. So as I get my angle, I've changed to a high thigh grip. I've got an overhook of the leg. I step on the mat. I'm going to bridge up, pull and kick this way. Everything's working in unison. And again, when I was doing this, in reality, I'm doing this as I'm falling from the seated position. So it's all going to work together. Now it's important if your initial attempt doesn't work. So if I go here, I go to move, it doesn't work. I keep scooting around. I keep scooting, I scoot. And I'm starting to get towards the point where I can actually just grip Ed's leg. So I'm moving towards the back to the point where I can actually start to grab that leg. Once I grab that leg, there's no way Ed can turn to face me again. I'm now working towards taking the back from behind him. There are times when I don't step on the mat. Occasionally I get a good enough angle where I've got my foot high and I feel comfortable using that to almost kick and off balance this way too. So sometimes we're here, move around, and I'm starting to pull towards me with this leg and start to kick back to off balance. I might not need to step on the mat, occasionally even kicking with my right leg into the stomach as a last little thing to kind of knock him over. Okay, so we can actually kick on our opponent. That's if your legs stayed high. Once more, occasionally we get to here, Ed's not going over, but he's almost there, and I kick with this leg. I almost just curl this one back as this one takes over to knock him over, and continue from there. So in summary, for getting the hand to plant to the mat, I'm going to put pressure, get my angle, sitting up. As I start to fall down, I overhook, get my shallow de la Riva hook, step, kick and pull, and bring Ed down to the mat to try and get his hands or hips down. If we go back up, if I've already got my leg high, sometimes during this, I'll even kick with my right leg to start to take Ed over. If I feel like that's not working, I would be back stepping on the ground and using just my shallow de la Riva hook. So let's have a look now at what to do if we do get an opportunity to take the back. So he steps back too far. So I start to off balance Ed and he decides to step instead. So what I'm going to look to do here, I'm going to look to change to a higher grip on the hip. So I want to grip, instead of just above the knee or on the thigh, I want to grip a little bit higher and I want to grip this leg. Okay. Usually underneath is the safer way to go, because if I go over and he steps forward, I miss the whole thing. Okay. Whereas if I go from underneath and he steps forward, I'll collect that. Okay. Now, notice my knee is low because I don't want to kick through and give the risk of any sort of like knee bar or just go into like knee bar or saddle or sit down into that. I don't want to give that knee line. Okay. So I want to keep my knee low and down tight like this. If you try and sit for the saddle or a knee bar here, my knee's going to be low and it's free and I'm quite safe. And I'm also going to make it extra safe because I'm going to pummel my foot behind as a crab hook. Okay. So notice I've got two things stopping Ed turning. If he wants to turn to your right, yeah, this arm's blocked that. And if he wants to turn to his left, my arm on the hip, and now my crab hook as well will stop that. Okay. So initially it was here. I put my foot behind and pummel that through. Occasionally you can put your knee behind as well. This is good, really good, but it's hard to follow up into a great position. Okay. The crab hook, I'm much more likely to take the back. Okay. Once I have that crab hook, I can start to now retract my left leg. Second crab hook, and start to pull his hips back towards me. Knees staying on the outside and pulling him down. Hips down, and then I extend him out with my feet. Looking to take the back. So I get my angle, I start to off balance Ed, he's going to step back, I hook, reach a bit higher, and I start to move myself in. Actually, I push off my leg, which brings my hips in. So if you notice this, if I push with my left knee, it moves my hips behind and lets me pummel the hook better, like so. Okay. Once I get my hook, second hook comes in, and then I can start reaching for the hips, extending out and taking the back. Just be wary not to get head-butted as you do this. I've seen people like pull on and extend without throwing the hips down. I need to be pulling in and extending down with my legs, not up in the air. Okay, I'll just show you and then I'll stop just before I get head-butted, but I have seen people do this where they pull and kick up and the head goes straight back into the head. Okay, so I want to not kick up, but my feet, as I start to feel his feet giving out underneath him, I kick down and away. Make sure his hips land below my hips. So as I get my angle, I go to off balance, head steps back, I grip the leg, change, move myself in, pummel the crab hook, second crab hook here, pulling in, extending out, sitting up, keeping my hooks until I get my seatbelt, and take the back. When I get my angle and I start to try to bring Ed's hips to the mat, sometimes he'll try to square up. But if he wants to do it here, because of the force I've got going behind, he's going to have to do a really big step. And I've got really low risk of getting caught in anything as I enter the wader. So if Ed goes around, I extend, and he's going to drop down, and I can come into the wader position. And we'll talk about, obviously, the entries to that again. But it's okay to keep your de la Riva hook. So we go back. So as Ed squares up, I'll usually keep the hook, which is kind of stretching him out and pulling his ankle up. So I've got even a better angle and pressure on the knee here, pressuring him. So he can't really work towards any sort of underhook on the entry. Okay, I have great positioning here to then hook underneath, roll back, and enter in an excellent wader position. Doing some narration of phase 1 and 2. So trying to get the angle and get the hips down to the mat, or potentially take the back if our opponent defends during that. Right, so we'll have a bunch of clips where we can look at attempts to do these. Okay, so this first one's actually where I managed to get out towards the back against a standing opponent. So you could call this the baby bowler. Some people call it that, or this is a common one if your opponent, if you do actually have access towards the far leg for a deep de la Riva hook. So you can see my right foot's gone to the far leg.
And this is usually good if my left hand has particularly good if my left hand has the de la Riva leg in. So normally it would be when we're playing de la Riva, my right hand would control the leg, but because of the angle I swing from, because I swing from a combat base, I've actually got the left hand holding the leg. And when I swing to the side, I can often get far enough around that I can hook the far leg. So you can just see my foot coming here and hooking that far leg. And that's going to stop Steve. When I get this far deep de la Riva, it's going to stop Steve stepping around to face me. All right, and then I'm able to grab the leg, and I take my left foot, and I pummel that. So watch this left foot will pummel over the top as I grab that far leg. So it can now become basically crab ride. Now Steve sits down, so I don't get to do the technique exactly how we showed, but I'm able to chase the crab ride position, which is not something we really cover in this instructional, but it is a great. I used to not think it worked very well in no-gi, but now I've totally changed my mind. Crab ride is a great position to attack from, or you can just use it to get on top. So in this scenario, my opponent's gone to do a back step, looking to go to the saddle, I believe. So I get my hook. I start to get an angle. Okay, so I've got the angle here. I grip the ankle, and it goes to back step, possibly to get the saddle, or potentially some people look for a knee bar as well. But you see how I just kept my knee down below the line of the hips. So if you were to sit back for the knee bar, my knee's well clear of the line of the hips here. That's not going to work. Same for the leg lock, okay? And then by just continually spinning that way, I get into a later stage of the bolo position. This is a technique that I use that again, this is not a berimbolo instructional, but if you're going to play de la Riva hips to the mat, you can either try to get on top, or you can try to get good at the berimbolo, which I suggest if you're playing that game heavily. But using it to get on top is absolutely fine too. All right, so I might just go to some clips where I'm dealing with a standing opponent just to see a bit more about getting the angle here. So this is a good one actually. And actually some of the options we got from this initial phase. So here, David's pushed down on my leg, so it's hard for me to get my hook, and I've got my foot next to the hip, trying to basically knock his hips down. I'm trying to use this pressure here to knock his hips this way, or make him try to step back. So if he tries to step back to get over the top of that leg, okay? I've managed to keep that tight enough that he couldn't strip that down though, okay? And what you'll notice with my hands, so notice I'm back, I'm pushing with my knee. When I want to get my angle, I'm going to actually get up and push with my hand and do a little elbow walk, okay? So I push with my hand to assist me in getting around. You can use your leg like this, but it's also good to use your hand, right? This hand can't do too much with the upper body, so it's either going to be like pushing on the ground or potentially ready to frame or to pull on that knee, okay? So you can see I'm on my elbow, and that slight elbow walk as well to the side lets me get a good angle. And then as I want to consolidate that angle, I fall. Because I'm seated up, I can fall with my shoulders and really get a good angle and a better chance at entering the position. So as I do that, David actually reacts quite well by flaring his knee out, which makes it a little more difficult to get. Then I'm able to reset and go again. Okay. And when I say hips to the mat, like the end of this phase is really the hips hit the mat or they post their hand. Because either way, we're now in the third phase. Okay, with their hands on the mat or their hip drops to the mat, I can now start to spin through and start looking for the last phase, which is to try to use the berimbolo or to try to get on top. All right, so you see the momentum of sitting up and falling to the side in this one. You see I've gone from let's just have a look at my hook here. So my de la Riva hook's open, my foot's just floating there. I turn it more face down, so I'm now pushing with my knee against the knee, preventing forward pressure. And then when I see the chance, for whatever reason, I felt I had to open my leg for a moment. I'm going to sit up. I get my hook, sit up, and then I fall into the side. And that momentum, notice how the momentum didn't bring my opponent to the ground, but it spun me right around towards almost towards the back. Okay, so even though I didn't pull his hips down, it spun me around, and then he's dropped his hips as a response. Because if I keep spinning towards the back, I can start looking to take the back from there. This is a good example of mixing the waiter, actually the next one after this, de la Riva and the waiter position. So here against Sam, I get my hook. He's actually stripped my de la Riva hook. So I probably feel here my chance of, like with my leg down there, what are the chances of I'm actually going to get around towards the back with, or like to get his hips down to the mat? Probably not likely. So I change my knee position back to pointing up and pushing into the knee. And I'm thinking now about going towards, it actually reset the position. So that lets me choose to either go towards waiter or towards de la Riva again. So once I do that, I've kind of reset my hook by pushing my knee up again. Okay, so if you watch again, my knee's gone. The hook is cleared. By pushing with it, it lets me reset it. And now I actually have some hook. Okay. I fall to the side, and that gets me enough angle to get around. Okay. And now I can start working to try to get the hips to the mat. But as I try to reach, Sam's actually standing, so I actually tried to go for that standing back take. But as he steps out, then he's going to start to face me again. So he actually stepped just as I went to reach for that leg. It was well timed. As I went to reach for that leg, he steps out. So you can see I go to reach it, and I miss it, but I spin back, and that momentum lets me get into the waiter position. Again, mixing these together here with Brad, I go for waiter. He starts to react. I can step, swing, and use that momentum to now get a deep overhook. See my arm coming tight. See, I'm seated and I'm falling down to the side. So make sure you are actually sitting up when you're playing these positions. And I'm pulling on the top of the thigh here, somewhat close to the knee. Trying to work the hips down towards the mat. Again, using that momentum is going to be really important. This last one's a good example of using the foot to the mat to get your angle, so scooting around the corner. Actually, maybe not here. Actually, yeah, it is, because he pummels through from this, and then the next time I'm going to use my foot to scoot. So you saw I used my hand before. This time, step, and because of the angle here, and because Rory's kind of held my leg, I can't get he's blocking access to have my foot right next to the hip, which is probably ideal. But I can get a lot of movement and improve the angle a lot by stepping my foot on the mat now and moving myself. You can see how much that's got me around the corner. All right, as I'm falling and pulling and trying to get those hips down. There we go. And that's caused Rory to drop. Okay, so his hips have dropped to the mat. I can start coming into the berimbolo position, the third phase, which we'll be working on in a moment. And in this one, I just work to come up on top.
So we're now working from the third phase, which we've managed to get our opponent's hips to the ground. And our main aim is going to be to get to the bolo position, so then we can look to take the back. But I also just want to first cover, some people won't like to invert and won't like to play the berimbolo style. And I don't think, up until now, we haven't really done any inversion techniques through the de la Riva. So even if you're not flexible, you'd be good up to here. Obviously, you need to be flexible enough to invert to be able to take the back from the bolo. But I'm actually just going to cover just a way to just get on top. So if you don't want to invert through, how can we look to get on top if we get our opponent's hips to the mat like this? So you can see I'm still holding the ankle with my left hand. Or if I was deep, I'll actually move back shallow. So I'm just holding the ankle like this. And I still have my de la Riva hook in. So I'm going to keep that, kind of keeps Ed's hips pinned to a certain degree. We'll talk about that a little more later. From here, I'm going to go to my side and I'm going to feed the leg from my left hand. So I'm going to push the foot up to my right hand like this. And I'm going to trap the shin or the ankle with my right leg as well. So I'm actually going to back heel here. So you can see I'm holding over the back of the ankle and I'm curling back here. So Ed's on his right side and I'm on my left side. So there's a really important rule for whoever gets on top from a scramble like this. Whoever's bottom leg is trapped will not be able to get up. So right now, Ed's bottom leg is trapped. His right leg is, because he's on his right side more, his bottom leg is trapped. If he tries to get up, stay on your right side and try and get up. You can see that it makes him basically stuck. Okay, he could only get up if he gets onto his left side. Now this becomes his top leg and he can get up. Right? Whereas if we go on the inverse here, my bottom leg, my de la Riva leg here, is free. I can take my bottom leg out, build my base up, and get on top. So that's what I'm going to look to do. So we had de la Riva here. I've knocked Ed down. I'm going to lift, feed the ankle, and curl back. I take my de la Riva leg out, get up, and start building my base here to stand up like so. Okay. Once I'm up, I can start to grip onto the leg and take top position. Be aware that Ed might start looking to stand up or to tilt to the other side as you do this. So I'm going to keep, like, with this leg, a little bit of inward pressure, just trying to keep him on his right side. So if Ed starts to get up, I try to, like, force him down here, and I can start to get up first and start to look to take advantage of that exchange. So we work to get our angle, get our opponent's hips down towards the mat. I start to change hands, capture the ankle, get up on my arm, stand up, and take top position. So we managed to get our opponent's hips down to the mat, or they're posting on their hand and their hips could be slightly elevated. We're going to go through now just the general sequence before we get into details of what we would do unobstructed. Almost always you'll have people defending and making this difficult, and we'll go through how to deal with those counters. But generally from here, I'm going to look to keep my de la Riva hook here. I keep it shallow and pressuring down near the hip. I'm going to look to do two things. I'm going to try to block this arm. So as I spin in, I'm going to start to come forward. I'm going to try to block the arm. And I'm going to try and beat Ed's knee line here with my leg. So I want to bring my leg over the top, like so. You can see I've covered his knee like that. Once I've got that, I'm now hooking the far hip. I'm going to do two things. I'm going to invert. So I'm going to see I'm looking towards Ed. I'm going to look away by tucking my head and rolling through. And I want to catch his far hip. Okay, you can see I can't reach it now. I want to get his far hip. As I invert through and tuck my head, I can reach that far hip. So again, unobstructed, I've got my de la Riva hook in here. Let me just straighten that out so you can see. I've got my hook kind of pinning Ed's hips. I want to beat Ed's knee line with my leg and hook his far hip here. All right. As I do that, I'm going to be framing with my hand on one side, elbow on the other, in front of the armpit. From there, I'm going to tuck my head through, looking the other way. So I'm looking at Ed, I'll look away, and I'll reach to that far hip here. And now I'm in great position for the last stage now, which is where I want to take Ed's back. Okay, so once I have this is basically the berimbolo, the late stage berimbolo position, I can start to elevate Ed's hips and look to take the back. That's stage 4. The next stage we'll cover.
Let's just quickly look at some of the counters that you need to be aware of, things people will do on the defensive to make it difficult to do this move. Later on, we'll show how to deal with that, but it's important for context to understand the things that your opponent might be looking to do. So quite often, the most common thing is people will block this leg from coming in front of the hip. So as Ed goes to spin through, you'll get people blocking and preventing that leg coming in and connecting to my upper body. You'll get people as well who, and actually an excellent counter is to underhook that leg. If I can underhook, I can actually turn this against Ed into a leg drag or some rolling back takes from here as well. Okay, so we need to be aware of that. You get some people who will, if you don't put this leg in the right spot, you get people who will counter bolo you by pushing your knee too deep. So as Ed swings his leg through, if he puts it in the wrong position, sometimes people will push that leg through. You see, I take his leg too deep on me, and that actually exposes Ed's back to me. A lot of the time you get people who just try to retreat and kick free. So they're kind of moving backwards, trying to kick and free themselves, making it difficult for you to really attach to the, ideally we're getting to their back, and if Ed's trying to do that as I'm scooting away, that can often be quite difficult to do. The person on top might look to go towards reverse half. So as Ed looks to spin through, a lot of times you get someone trying to come into the reverse half guard position like so. So winning this space here, and then starting to free their leg to pass the guard. You get, if they can, they might try and stand back up. So you've knocked their hips to the mat. If they can, you might see someone getting back up and getting back into an earlier stage of the berimbolo. Another common counter is to flare the knee out. So look, if my knee gets turned in, my back, there's a direct access to my back. So if Ed starts looking towards my back, it starts closing that gap on me. Often if someone flares their knee out, if Ed wants to take that same angle, as long as my knee stays in front of him, so we just turn, it stays in front, blocks him getting real access towards my back. So you get people who often flare their knee out like that. We'll cover how to deal with that too. Another variant of getting back up is actually to follow Ed. So if Ed spins, I'm going to follow him by jumping over and standing back up. And lastly, just being aware as well that they might look for leg locks on you. Okay, so it could be that they look for the saddle on this leg. If Ed starts to shoot his leg a bit deeper towards like a deep de la Riva, you might get someone trying to pull in to the saddle towards a heel hook. And you will get people trying to leg lock your free leg, okay? Sometimes with a straight leg lock, sometimes with a toe hold. In my opinion, they are terrible ideas for the person to go. Like I like when someone goes for this leg, they actually give you access to the back. Look how I start turning my back towards it. So if you get good at countering these, we still have to respect them, but if you get good at countering these ones, it ends up really good for the person who's attacking. We talked about the importance of this a moment ago, but I'll just talk it as a concept. One of the things we have to do if we want to take the back is beat the knee line. I need to make sure my leg comes over past its knee line here. Okay, so usually in doing so, we'll hook the hip, but my knee has blocked that space. Okay, this gives me access to Ed's back. Right, that knee being in the way is a block. This knee's in the way. I go for the back. He's blocking me from being able to attach really anywhere on his upper body. I can't get a good handle while that leg's in the way. So while we're setting up our attack, we really need to make sure we're turning the knee and climbing over the knee like so. Okay. Once I've beaten that knee line, I have direct access with my arms towards attaching towards the back, so I can climb a little bit higher. So the way we beat the knee line is our hips come up. Okay, I can't, when my hips are flat on the ground here, it's very hard to get a good purchase on the knee line. It's easy for him to push that leg off. But if I manage to swing my hips up, I can go deep across the knee line, and now I'm locked in. I've got my knee pressured. Once I'm here, my pressure down into his thigh with my knee, so it's actually hard for him to push that off. I've got pressure down on the thigh, making it difficult to clear. Also, if our opponent flares their knee, making it difficult to, and now it's much more difficult for me to
clear the knee line, or at least I have to give up a lot to do that. You see, from here, I have to give up a lot just to clear the knee line. Often we want to work to straighten the leg out to make the knee line easier to clear. So you can see if it's flared like that, it's very far for me to go. If I can use my legs and my grip to straighten Ed's leg, it's a lot closer. Okay, so you look here, now that his leg's straight, I can go here to clear the knee line. Whereas if his leg's bent, I have to go all the way wide, and it's a very poor angle. Okay, so one of the ways we deal with someone who's making that difficult is we look to straighten the leg to get past that knee line. Talk about the invert now. There's going to be two different types of invert, or there's going to be two slightly different inverts we will do. And this is going to depend on whether we can beat the knee line or not. So if I can, I want to beat the knee line with my leg, and we talked about our hips coming up, like so. Okay. So that's going to be the initial part of the invert. In this scenario, I will be moving my invert's going to really take me close to Ed's back. So in this scenario, I want to get up on my shoulder and my hips coming forward like this. So you can see I've really moved towards Ed first, right? This is the initial part of the invert because I'm up on my shoulder and I've beaten the knee line. Then I curl into this gap, so kind of like pivoting on my shoulder. I curl my head forward and roll through. So I kind of head forward, look up to the roof, and roll to the other side. At the same time, that's when I can reach the back. So notice me bringing my shoulder forward, tucking and looking up, and head out the other side, right? So that's our ideal scenario with the invert. We come up on our shoulder, so I come forward, hips come up, I capture the knee line, I bring my shoulder forward, and I roll through, and I'm very deep on the hips. I've gripped his far hip, I've got good positioning with my legs, as we'll talk about later, and I've got a good chance at working to take the back. The second type of invert we will do is when I can't capture the knee line. So let's say Ed's blocked my leg here. So no matter what I do, even if I do the same thing, I can't bring my leg over the knee line. In fact, it really jams me from doing that movement. If I go up and forward, I end up exposing a lot to try to attack. Instead of coming up and forward here, when this leg's blocked, I just want to spin more on the spot. Okay, I don't want to come up. I just tuck in and elevate my hips. So I bring my shoulder towards me, but not I don't like get my hips up in the air so much as I roll my hips away, swinging outwards with my hips and inwards with my shoulder. Okay, you need to have your elbow tucked in to be able to invert. If you're like this, your elbow will jam. My elbow needs to go underneath and pretty much put it behind my hips, like this. Okay, then I can start to roll through, and this is kind of like a shallow invert where I'm then going to work to upgrade my positioning and look to capture the knee line second. So if you look here, just have a look at my elbow. So Ed would be blocking my leg. I keep this leg back so you don't kind of make it so he doesn't have great ability. Like if I extend that, he can control it really well. So just keep this leg back. My head comes in, my hips swing away. And notice here, my elbow being tucked in under my hips is actually what elevates my hips here. If I flare my elbow out, that lifts my hips in the air and helps me come through. So that elbow positioning is really important to roll your hips up and get the inverted position. Okay? So I just want to show that again. If I didn't put my elbow under, if I kept my elbow open, I get jammed. Or if I went like this, I'd be too jammed. Okay? I want to have my elbow underneath my hips. So when I push off the ground with my elbow, my hips will roll through and assist with the invert. One more time. Shallow invert, Ed's blocking the leg, tuck under, elbow elevates my hips through, my head comes underneath, and then we're in good position to start to upgrade our grips. Talking about our top leg position now and where we want this. So we talked about beating the knee line, which was important. So I come up on my shoulder and I come through. And here I'm going to usually hook right across the hip here, all right? When we get this hook, I want to hook it tight and have tension pulling back, okay? So if Ed tries to clear this grip, it's actually kind of stuck, especially if I'm driving in with my roll. So if I'm just sitting here, you probably can eventually clear it, but my pressure comes from the invert too, actually driving pressure through that leg. So it's quite attached, okay? Very difficult for him to clear that because I'm rolling in to the pressure on that leg. Now, of course, people are going to block that leg, and that's going to make it a real issue. If you feel like someone's really working at that, sometimes a better position to look for is under the armpit, okay? Nice and high under the armpit here, hooking with my shin closing off across his chest, so there's no gap, okay? If I can hook this armpit and put this close, try and clear that with your hand. Notice how hard it is to get a good grip, okay? So at least, I mean, down here, he can sometimes grab the ankle and at least get a solid control. But if someone's really active with their hand blocking, and if I can get in hooked under the armpit here, this is really nice. And it's gonna still give me good positioning when I roll through to look to start to take the back. Now, another really important thing with positioning of my top leg is I don't want to shoot my knee deep. I don't want my knee to go through past the hips here, like this. It's great later on in the berimbolo, at the last stage, which we cover later. But now, right now, before I have my other controls, I really risk the counter bolo when I do that. So if my knee here shoots through, push my leg through it, and I can start getting my back turned, okay? So imagine I'm trying to beat Ed's knee line, and he's got a chance at counter boloing me using the counter bolo. If I make sure my knee line is not beaten by Ed, okay, so he wants to beat my knee line by pushing that through and having a chance to go for the back. If I focus on keeping my knee free, if Ed tries to go for my back, you can see my whole leg will block. Like if you were to reach towards my back here, it's gone, okay? When this comes through, there's now access to the back, right? So as we do our spin, you'll notice I really look, especially this earlier phase, don't shoot deep. We want to keep our shin, our foot on one side of the hip, either the ankle, armpit or hip, but our knee on the near side, even to here, okay? Late stage, so especially if Ed falls back, as we'll talk about later, now, okay, I can put my knee in and use that to take him through. In the event that Ed's holding this leg, what you do not want to do, really important, do not swing to try to get the knee line, okay? This is a classic mistake, and Ed can counter me really well if I do this. So if I want the knee line, he's blocking my leg, never swing wide. I never want to take this leg like this and then try to get the knee line position. If Ed was to reach his hand inside here, he's now got access towards my back. Okay, if he rolls through, it's either leg drag or back take from here. Okay, you might get away with this against someone who doesn't know how to counter it, but trust me, it's not worth practicing. I think when you first start, often we want to get momentum, so we try to do this big pendulum, but it's just not a good idea to do it like that. Okay, when we invert, if I can't capture the knee line immediately with this top leg, my foot stays tucked, okay, like this, right? So there's no space under this leg. If Ed wants to swim under that leg, it's difficult and I can fight that. If I open wide, he blocks it and I'm done. In the event that you're unable to get the leg above the knee line, that's usually when we're doing our shallow invert, as we talked about earlier. So I'm spinning under the leg here. I want to be tucking. Sometimes, even here, it's difficult. And instead of going for the knee line, you're going to just try to work your knee under the leg, okay? So sometimes we're going to go just here, okay? Underneath the shin, holding the foot up, okay? This is kind of a placeholder to eventually take my foot back above the line of the knee again later, okay? But if that's immediately blocked, if Ed's blocking my leg, sometimes this leg will go underneath the shin. That usually lets me elevate his foot and start to upgrade my position into either crab ride or back into the foot hooking the far hip. Let's now talk about the de la Riva hook and how the role this is playing. Okay, so usually at first it's a shallow, like when I say shallow, it's on the near leg here, and there's a deep de la Riva hook where I'd hook the far leg. Okay, generally don't go deep too early because I lose too much connection, and that's not really what I want. I want to be tight. My leg at first is actually almost like pinning Ed's hips, so I've kind of brought him to the ground. He's trying to fight like my leg, for example, and my leg is actually pushing downwards. The outstep of my foot is pinning his hips down by like pressuring and extending down. So if Ed was to start trying to get back up, like I've got some pressure kicking, extending, and forcing him back down to the mat. If I can just show without that, and Ed starts to try to get back up, he's going to have a pretty easy time. His hips can come forward and over, and I can prevent that with this hook here. All right. The other thing my hook is doing is keeping Ed from flaring his knee out. So we talked about him wanting his knee open like this to block the back. When I hold the ankle, kick straight, and point my knee inwards, that tends to turn Ed's knee to the roof. Okay, and if he's trying to turn his knee out now, that's actually kind of difficult. So if I can apply this pressure, I can keep his knee facing more towards the camera, less away. And it's going to be easier to beat the knee line than if I don't have that pressure, if I just have a loose hook. Or if it's too shallow, for example, at the knee here, where Ed can flare out, I'm going to have a harder time beating the knee line than if I'm hooked in near the hip, stepping down, pressuring in with my knee to start to bring my second leg in. Now, really important that we want to change our hook to a deep de la Riva hook as we start to progress towards the back. Not too early. Again, I don't go here. If I went here now, just push on my leg, push it off. Like I can't really stop that. It's just waving there in free space. Having it here is much harder for Ed to push off. It's really locked in, and as he's doing that, I'm pummeling through, dealing with his grip. Okay, but as I start to get my right leg in, as this begins to take the far hip, I also want to shoot my left leg in too. So I've basically got like two hooks here. If Ed starts moving away from me, it's hard for him to get his back fully disengaged. So I can, because I'm hooking him here, I can start reaching towards the back. Now occasionally, this leg instead will work as just like a hook on the ankle like this. I'll actually just curl back like that on the ankle. There's a few scenarios where that will be the case. That's usually when I want some level of control with it and it's not doing its job up here, right? So for example, if Ed was to get up on your knee, he's starting to build his base again, okay? And this is after, like I start beating the knee line and he starts standing up, okay? Sometimes it's better to take this out and use it for base, okay? Like this, so I can kind of build my own base up to chase his back this way. Whereas if he was standing up and I kept going here, I'm actually going to struggle to close the gap towards the back. So a lot of the time, when we've got our hooks, if our opponent starts getting up, we take our leg right to the ankle. So if he tries to run away here, I'm still attached, okay? And I can start going for the back. Sometimes, as we get into our later stage, we will start to move our leg towards their ankle too, as a way of kind of stretching our opponent out. Could be to make sure the knee doesn't free. I can stretch out, pulling at the ankle, and also to pull Ed's hips forward as a way to start to expose the back. The last role we'll talk about with our de la Riva hook leg is actually assisting in pummeling my right leg, okay, my top leg in getting in position. So again, let's go for an example where Ed holds my leg. Often I'll use my left leg to pummel against this arm. And to do that, you usually have to invert a little bit, okay? So I start to spin, and I use my leg to start to pummel, okay? Once I block, it allows me to start to get the foot underneath the armpit, and then I can start continuing into the positions that I like with this leg in a second. Okay, so again, bed was blocking. Often, because this is such a high priority, beating the knee line and catching the far side of the body, armpit or hip, I'll often have to change the use of this leg to assist me in winning that battle by inverting, winning that battle by pummeling, and then I can start going back into using that leg to assist in taking the back. Let's talk about what I'm doing with my arms now. So we talked about our legs, talk about the arms now. So ideally, we talked about this, I want to get the far hip. So everything going well, I reach this hand as I invert to capture the far hip. Just turn around a bit, Ed. Just around the way. Yeah. So you see my hand is across the back and gripping the hip. So make sure when I talk about this, I'm talking about going behind the back and reaching to the hip, not under the leg and reaching the hip. This is basically useless. Okay, this isn't going to help me at all. It needs to be behind the back. The forearm locking around the back with this grip is actually really important for stopping him retreating and helping me bring his hips forward. So when I grip the back and my forearms behind, if Ed was to retreat, it basically just pulls me with him. So I'm stuck to his back to some degree. But sometimes you can't reach that. The next best thing you can do, if that's out of reach, is come in front of the hip with your hands. So I want to be like right at the top, wedged in at the hip here, and curling my hand in nice and deep over the top. So what you'll notice here, if Ed scoots backwards, this might not hold, but that's because the leg's out straight. The more I lift his foot up, the more purchase I get with this. Okay, so now, because of the angle, the leg's kind of up, I can actually pull against a retreat. So if Ed goes to retreat now, he's going to pull me with him. Whereas if we're down here, he's going to move himself and I won't be able to follow. So my left arm is obviously gripping the ankle. If you had a deep grip, you actually want to go back to a shallower grip because I can put my elbow in better position for the invert. Okay, if my arm's wrapped around too deep, his foot blocks me from fully pulling my arm underneath me. Whereas if I'm back here, I can start to pull my arm underneath my hips. So I can actually get my arm under my hips. Whereas if it's too deep, the leg will block it, retreating underneath. So even though we might have had a deep grip to knock them down, we're going to change back to here. Now, one thing we have to be aware of is this arm here. So often Ed's looking to cross face me here and reach towards my head and block me here. All right. So this one's actually a really good grip to use to give you space to invert. I want to put my hand underneath the far side of the scapula and my forearm coming across the armpit with my elbow on the other side. Okay. So, I mean, while Ed's back, he's kind of very far back. I don't feel like I have to do this at all. But if he's actually trying to, so get up on your knee, on your foot, sorry. Just on your foot. Yeah. So kind of, yeah. And you're leaning in, if he's trying to cross face here, this will kill my ability to invert. So as soon as we have someone in a posture like this, I want to I frame the scapula, elbow coming up, try and pummel through that. It's very difficult to win that battle. Okay, I'm right underneath the armpit, preventing here. If you just block with your hand, he can pummel through that. He can circle, and I lose that. I actually want to have this grip here. Okay, and then this open space for me to spin through. Lastly, if Ed's using this hand, this near hand to block my leg, often I can post on the tricep, and then I can start to win that battle again. Okay, so again, he's blocking with that arm. I can't get my leg in. I block his triceps, straighten my arm. He can't follow now as I start to pummel and get my foot in position, ready to attack. So in summary, with this right arm, with our left hand, we grip the ankle, and that pretty much just stays here. That's the grip. Sometimes we use that to lift their leg up, like we talked about earlier when we're gripping the hip. With my right hand, if his arm's bothering me, that's my first thing to block. Okay, I want to get this frame here and pummel for that. And then as I start to get a bit deeper, as I begin my invert, I start to then reach for the far hip or potentially to the near hip if I'm shallow.